The frontier sun was merciless that day, beating down on the small town of Willow Creek until the dust shimmered like gold powder in the air. Stagecoaches rattled past, horses snorted at the hitching post, and the swinging doors of the saloon banged open and shut as laughter and music spilled into the street. It was the sound of life in the West, rowdy, loud, and full of belonging. But not everyone belonged. On the far side of the street, a thin figure moved with a rag in her hand and a pail balanced against her hip. Her name was Clara, though few bothered to call her by it. To most she was simply the orphan, the girl who had no people, no name worth remembering, and no one to stand up for her. At 15 she had been left at the mercy of the town, and now, years later, she earned her keep scrubbing floors in the saloon, where rough laughter often turned cruel in her direction. She kept her head down, eyes fixed on the scuffed wooden planks, pretending she didn't hear the whispers or see the mocking smirks. Still, the words found her: charity case, nobody's girl. When families gathered for supper behind lamplit windows, Clara would pause outside, watching the warm glow, aching with a longing she dared not voice. Yet on this blistering afternoon, as she wrung out her rag and fought to swallow her pride, a shadow lingered in the doorway of the saloon. Someone powerful was watching her, someone whose gaze would change the course of her lonely life forever. The town of Willow Creek sat cradled between endless stretches of prairie and the jagged shoulders of the desert hills. The land was both cruel and beautiful, dust storms that could strip a man's spirit bare. Sunsets so red and gold they seemed to set the heavens aflame. Ranches dotted the horizon like lonely islands, miles apart, where cattle grazed under the watchful eyes of weary cowboys. Life here was hard, but for some, it was also full of riches. At the heart of Willow Creek stood the Dawson family ranch, the largest for miles around. Their sprawling pastures, painted fences, and well-fed horses marked them as the undisputed rulers of the land. Folks spoke the Dawson name with both respect and envy, for the rancher's wealth gave him a grip on the town tighter than the sheriff's badge ever could. His sons rode the best horses, wore boots polished by Mexican leather, and carried themselves as if the world belonged to them. Yet not everyone in Willow Creek lived beneath such privilege. The orphans, the drifters, the saloon girls, and the stable hands fought for scraps of coin and morsels of bread. Clara was among them, her hands always raw from soap and water, her back bent over the saloon floorboards while music and laughter rang above her head. She dreamed of satin dresses and supper tables where no one laughed at her hunger. But dreams like hers had no place here, not in a town where one family held the reins, and a poor orphan girl was nothing more than dust in the wind. Clara learned early that the West was not kind to the weak, and in the eyes of Willow Creek, she was weaker than most. Her employer at the saloon, a barrel-chested man named Harlan Briggs, barked orders like a drill sergeant and lashed out when the work wasn't done fast enough. If her hands faltered on the mop or her steps slowed from exhaustion, she felt the sting of his words and sometimes his hand. To him, she was cheap labor, replaceable and unworthy of kindness. The townsfolk were no gentler. Children mocked her in the street, mimicking the way her patched dress trailed in the dust. Women drew their children closer when she passed, whispering warnings about that orphan girl as though loneliness was a disease that might spread. Men sometimes jeered when she carried buckets from the well, tossing coins at her feet as if to test how desperate she might be. And still, Clara endured. By day, she bowed her head and bore the weight of humiliation. By night, she climbed the narrow stairs to her attic room above the saloon and pressed her face against the cracked window pane. Out beyond the rooftops, the desert stretched wide and silent, its stars scattered like silver dust across the sky. That was when the ache hit hardest. She whispered to herself the questions no one would answer. Why was I left? Who will ever love me? Until tears dampened her thin pillow. Yet Clara never realized she was not as invisible as she believed. Unseen in the shadows of the street, someone's gaze often lingered as she worked, as she wept, as she carried her burdens alone. Someone powerful, someone whose world was nothing like hers, was watching, and her life was about to shift in ways she could scarcely imagine. The Dawson name carried weight in Willow Creek, and none bore it more visibly than James Dawson, the rancher's eldest son. Broad-shouldered and striking, With eyes the color of storm clouds and a confidence born from privilege, he could have had anything or anyone he wanted. Yet beneath the polished boots and the easy smile lay a restlessness he couldn't name. While others envied his birthright, James often felt like a man trapped in a golden cage. One evening, restless from the noise of his father's parlor, James wandered into town. The saloon was its usual blur of clinking glasses, shuffling cards, and rowdy laughter. But as he stepped inside, his gaze caught on a girl kneeling on the floor, wringing out a rag, her face half hidden by stray strands of hair. There was nothing remarkable about her to the casual eye. Her dress was patched, her shoes worn thin, but something in the way she moved held his attention. She bent beneath the weight of others' scorn with quiet dignity, never once lashing out, never once letting the bitterness touch her eyes. James lingered, watching the grace in her suffering, the courage it took simply to endure. For a fleeting moment, Clara glanced up. Their eyes met hers, wary, his searching, and the room around them seemed to fall away. A spark flickered between them, soft and dangerous. Clara quickly dropped her gaze, cheeks burning. She told herself it meant nothing. Men like him didn't see girls like her. Love, she thought bitterly, was for others, never for her. After that night, James found excuses to linger in town more often. He claimed it was business for his father's ranch or errands at the general store. But the truth was simpler. His eyes sought Clara. He noticed things no one else cared to see: how her hands trembled from exhaustion, how she sometimes skipped her own meal so she could keep working, how she ducked her head to avoid insults that stung sharper than a whip. Quietly, without fanfare, he began to help. When she passed through the back door of the saloon, he would sometimes leave a parcel of bread or an apple where she might happen upon it. When drunken cowhands mocked her for being nothing more than a nameless orphan, James stepped forward with a calm but cutting word that silenced their laughter. And when no one else dared speak gently to her, his voice carried a kindness that warmed her in ways she didn't understand. Clara tried to ignore it, telling herself kindness from a Dawson meant nothing, that it was pity, not care. Yet every stolen glance, every hushed greeting made her chest tighten with feelings she was afraid to name. But secrets do not stay hidden in a small town. Villagers began to whisper, tongues wagging at the thought of the rancher's son showing interest in the orphan girl. The saloon girls smirked knowingly, and even Harlan Briggs eyed her with suspicion. Clara's fear grew, fear that his kindness would cost her what little security she had her still. In the quiet moments, the brushing of fingers as he handed her a coin, the way his eyes softened when they met hers, she felt the stirrings of something forbidden. It was fragile, it was dangerous, but it was real. And once planted, such seeds could not easily be uprooted. The whispers grew sharper with every passing day, curling through Willow Creek like smoke from a prairie fire. At first it was sly glances, hushed words behind hands. Soon it became open mockery. Imagine that, sneered a shopkeeper one afternoon. The Dawson boy wasting time on a ragged saloon girl. The laughter that followed was cruel and loud enough for Clara to hear. She kept her eyes on the ground, but each word pressed like a stone against her chest. Harlan Briggs, never one to pass up the chance to remind Clara of her place, cornered her after a night's work. His thick fingers gripped her arm as he growled, "I hear you've been keeping company above your station. You want to lose the only roof over your head? Then you best stop letting him look at you like that." His threat left no doubt. If the gossip continued, she would be out on the street with nothing but the dress on her back. James faced his own trial at the Dawson Ranch. His father, Samuel Dawson, was a man of iron pride, a rancher whose reputation was carved as deep as the canyons. When word reached him of James lingering near Clara, his temper boiled. "You are a Dawson," he thundered across the dining table, fist slamming against polished oak. "Our name will not be dragged through the mud by some orphan girl. You'll end this nonsense, or you'll answer to me." The choice loomed like a gallows over James's head: duty to his father, wealth, and the ranch that would one day be his, or the fragile bond that tied his heart to a girl the world deemed unworthy. For Clara, fear gnawed at her. She had nothing to offer him but her heart, and she wondered if that could ever be enough. The night was colder than most, the kind of chill that seeped into Clara's bones and made her feel smaller than ever. She had been told that morning by Harlan Briggs that her time at the saloon was nearly up. "Too much talk, girl," he'd spat, his lip curling. "You've brought shame on my business. By week's end, you'll be gone." With nowhere to go, she wandered beyond the town's edge, where the desert stretched silent beneath a silver wash of moonlight. The stars hung low, shimmering like scattered promises just out of reach. She sank onto a rock, pulled her thin shawl tight, and let the tear she had hidden for so long finally fall. The sound of hoof beats broke the silence. She looked up, startled, and there he was, James Dawson, dismounting with urgency, his eyes searching until they found hers. Without a word, he crossed the sand, knelt beside her, and took her trembling hands in his. "Clara," he whispered, his voice fierce and tender all at once. "You are not nothing. You are my forever." The world seemed to still in that moment. The risk was deadly, their secret now a vow, but for the first time, Clara's heart dared to believe love might be hers. It didn't take long for their secret to shatter. The whispers had grown to loud, the stolen glances to frequent. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Samuel Dawson stormed into town like a thunderhead on horseback, his face carved with fury. He found them near the saloon, James standing protectively at Clara's side. "You shame this family," Samuel's voice roared across the street, drawing the attention of half the town. Windows creaked open, and folks spilled from porches to watch the spectacle. A Dawson does not sully his name with an orphan girl who scrubs floors for pennies. Clara's heart pounded. She felt the weight of every eye on her, every cruel smirk that silently agreed with his words. Fear surged through her. If James defied his father, he could lose everything: the ranch, his inheritance, the life he had been born to. She couldn't let him pay that price. With trembling hands, she stepped back. "I'll go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't fight for me. I'm not worth it." But James turned, his storm-gray eyes blazing. He stepped forward, planting himself between his father and Clara as though his body alone could shield her from the world. "No," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "She is worth everything. And if it costs me the ranch, the Dawson name, or every last coin in our coffers, then so be it." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. The people of Willow Creek held their breath, watching a son defy a father, love defy legacy. And for the first time, Clara saw it not just in whispers or stolen moments, but in the open air, in front of God and the town itself. His love was no secret. It was a declaration. For a long, breathless moment, Samuel Dawson said nothing. His jaw clenched, his fists shook at his sides, and it seemed as though the weight of generations bore down on his shoulders. But then his gaze shifted not to his son, but to Clara. She did not beg. She did not shrink back. Though her dress was worn and her hands calloused, she stood with quiet strength, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. Something in that look softened the steel in Samuel's eyes. He saw not weakness, but a resilience forged in hardship, the kind that no wealth could buy. Slowly, the fury ebbed from his face, leaving only weariness. "You would risk everything for her?" he asked his son. James's answer was simple. "I already have." The town, gathered in tight circles, waited for the verdict. At last Samuel gave a gruff nod, his voice low. "Then, she will be one of us." A murmur rippled through the crowd, softer than before, less cruel. Faces that once mocked now carried the weight of quiet respect. Clara felt the change like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time, she was no longer the orphan. She was chosen. She belonged. And so, under the endless skies of the frontier, Clara's story turned from loneliness to belonging. What began as whispers of mockery became whispers of wonder, a tale folks would carry for years to come. She had once been the girl no one wanted, the girl the town scorned, but in the end, it was her heart, steady and unbroken, that proved stronger than all their prejudice. James had risked the inheritance of land and legacy, and in doing so, he had gained something far greater, a love that could not be bought, a forever that no ranch could rival. In Willow Creek, life moved on. Dust still rose from the streets. Cattle still grazed on distant hills, but for Clara, every dawn was different. She woke no longer as an orphan, but as a woman who was truly seen, truly cherished. Her worth had never been measured in coin or name, but in the courage to keep standing when the world pushed her down. And now, dear listener, The question rests with you. Would you risk everything, wealth, comfort, even family name for the one person who makes your heart whole? Because out here in the Wild West, where storms rage and dust devours, love remains the only treasure that endures. True family is not bound by blood or name, but by the love and courage we dare to claim.